Attorney General Jeff Sessions revealed today a federal prosecutor is investigating the FBI, but says he does not intend to appoint a second special counsel at this time. U.S. Attorney for Utah, John Huber, will work with Sessions, Rod Rosenstein, and the Inspector General on the probe. Meanwhile, Sessions still thinks he did the right thing, recusing himself from the Russia investigation. In an interview with Time magazine, Sessions said the head of the DOJ must follow the same rules as the rest of the department. Sessions' recusal led to the appointment of Robert Mueller as special counsel, who continues his 11-month investigation to this day. Joining me now, George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley. Good evening, Jonathan, and welcome to the program.
Thanks, Stuart.
No second special counsel. What do you make of that?
Well, he didn't foreclose the possibility of a special counsel. What the Attorney General said is that he is having a U.S. attorney essentially team up with the Inspector General within the Justice Department to investigate these matters. I actually think it's the right decision. I think the president should listen to General Sessions on this. He can appoint a special counsel later. If I were someone like Andrew McCabe, I would not be happy with this. You have a U.S. attorney outside of Washington who has the ability to prosecute cases, who's working with an inspector general who has already made findings against McCabe. That's not a good situation for him, and it's probably not a good situation for James Comey.
Do these prosecutors have the same power to investigate and get to the bottom of things that a special counsel would have?
Actually, yes. I think people are missing what may be a brilliant move here by Sessions. What he did is he essentially combined the powers of the Inspector General with the powers of a line prosecutor. So this prosecutor does have not just the experience and training to look for a criminal case, he has the ability to move a case of that kind. Moreover, if he finds that crimes were committed and that many people of the FBI might be implicated, Sessions has reserved the right to go ahead and appoint a special counsel. That's a powerful combination. There's a great deal here that we're still waiting for. The Inspector General still has the ability to refer McCabe for prosecution. What we know is that whatever was in that report of his led the FBI Director Wray to essentially force him into terminal retirement. It led Sessions to fire him. But if he in fact did lie to investigators or misled them, he could still be referred to for criminal charges.
I believe that the Utah prosecutor, Mr. Huber, and Michael Horowitz both are Obama holdovers, and they are investigating the Obama administration. Now, a lot of people would call that a sort of an implied conflict of interest. You don't see that?
I don't. I don't know Mr. Horowitz or Mr. Huber personally. I have certainly know of them. They both have very good reputations. Horowitz has already gone after McCabe. He is known as a dogged investigator. Huber doesn't have any skin in the game. He's not part of the Beltway. He's not part of what people usually refer to as the deep state. That distance between him and Washington is very important. I don't know of anyone who has suggested that either one of these gentlemen is a partisan actor.
Okay. These messages, the latest text messages between Strzok and Page, they appear to bring President Obama, the very top level of the administration, into play, if I can put it like that. Do you see it that way?
It may, and in fact, that's one of the reasons I think this is the better approach. If a special counsel were appointed, there would be a great deal of delay as we pursue these types of allegations. They're already pursuing them. They've got staff on the scene and able to acquire this evidence. People like McCabe were close to retirement, so time may be of the essence. So I do think this is something they must look at, and it obviously raises troubling issues.
Jonathan, I do believe that the general public has lost track of all the names, investigations, the ins and outs of the law. I have a very hard time following it on a daily basis, I really do. Now, you're in the business, if I can put it like that, but most people are not. And I think there's a degree of fatigue with
Yeah.
these investigations that's coming on strong, and that may impede us getting to the truth.
I think that's a very good observation to make. I have a column out today in the Hill newspaper that talks about why it's important for us to have the investigation of the FBI separate from the Mueller investigation. And the reason is simple. We are so divided as a country, and it's getting worse. And I think that the politicians of both parties have failed because there's little faith that people have in what they've heard. There's so much spin. The most important thing the government can do now to regain trust is to create independent and public reports so that we can reach our own conclusions. That's why I support the investigation that has been launched by General Sessions.
It would be nice to see those reports appear very quickly, but that's not likely, is it?
Well, that you may be right there. It's hard to say how long this will take, but in the end, I hope whatever comes out of it will be public, because what we need now is not necessarily more indictments. We need information.
Yes, sir.
That is spin-free.
Jonathan Turley, thank you for at least trying to make it simple and understandable. We do appreciate that, Jonathan.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.